Hello, everyone, and welcome to Recycling in America. This is our fourth in a five-part series where we're exploring what's working, what's not, and what do we do about it. So let's see, we see folks coming in. I'm not quite seeing the tally counter, Lily, so I can't see all the Q&A this time, but it looks like we're rolling, right?
Yep, folks are rolling in. We just hit 300.
Awesome. Okay. Great. Then I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited for each one of these series. We've had about 2,800 people registered, and a lot of people sign on to get really communicative in the chat, which is exactly what we want. So here's our plan today. I'm Keith Harrison, founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership, and I'm so glad you've joined us in our speakers, because if we're going to really fix recycling in America, it's going to take each and every one of us from every different perspective. So we love having conversations where we put the hot stuff out there and push and pull to see what we can land. So today, first, we're going to want to know what's on your mind. So get ready for a poll. As you're coming in, you're going to see that there is both a chat and the Q&A. Go ahead and try out that chat. Maybe pop in where you're signing in from and say hello there. The chat is the place that you get to really connect with one another. We ask for you to keep it respectful and polite, and make sure you know that you're engaging in good faith on topic with what we're talking about today. But the chat is, to share your thoughts. The Q&A is where we get to do deeper dives, and I'll talk about some staff that we have on who are helping to answer the deep dive Q&As, but we'll also be pulling from those to give to the speakers. So when we get started today, I'm going to lay out what the data says. I know a lot of you enjoy getting the decks from these presentations because we try to put the most prominent information in there for you. So I'll set the stage, and then we really want to dig into our guest speakers and hear your questions. We have three fantastic speakers today, and so I would love to have them say hello and introduce themselves. The first is Erin Simon. Hello, Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Simon. I'm with World Wildlife Fund. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. And we also have Paul Nowak. Hello.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. Paul Nowak, Executive Director at Green Blue. While you might not know Green Blue, you probably know some of our programs like the Sustainable Packaging Coalition and the How to Recycle label. Excited for our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And we also have Wes Carter, who's the president at Atlanta Packaging and has also been plagued with the worst technical problems you would want as you're kicking off a webinar today. But I have full faith that IT and Wes will get back here soon as possible, and I'll keep an eye out for that. In addition to our three speakers, we have 5 members of the Recycling Partnership staff. Karen Bandhauer's here. Hi, Karen. Karen helped build our model and has been with the partnership since before the beginning, and is back on staff after a few years working on important other issues, and we're glad to have her. Allie Blandina's here. Hi, Allie.
Hello, hello.
Glad to have you. Allie works on building our pathway to circularity that we'll talk about today, and is deep into some of the most, how do we build solutions for challenging materials. Danielle Cooper's here. I think Danielle, hello. Danielle it knows what it takes when to make something, to build something into recyclability, and that's just design plays one critical role. So hello, Danielle. Brittany LaValle leads our material work groups, things like our polypropylene coalition, but also the film and flex work in California. And then, so hello, Brittany. And we also have autographs might be needed here for our friend Dylan DeThomas, who's very active in working his tail off to pass policy in the United States. So welcome, Dylan.
Hello.
So our 5 staff will be active in chat and Q&A. So remember, again, you use chat to communicate with one another, and use the Q&A to dive deeper questions of what does this really mean, and Lily will be pulling some forward to pass to our speakers too. Lily, I forgot, I got so excited. Let's go back. How about that poll, Lily? Lily, do you want to
You
say
bet.
hello too? I want to also give a shout out to Lily, who coordinated all of this series and will be on vacation next week. So Lily's done a phenomenal job, earned every minute of a vacation. So Lily, what are our questions for our poll today?
Yeah, and thanks for everyone that's been rolling with us throughout this entire series. So we've got our fourth poll today, checking in on design. So asking you to scale, scale of 1 to 10, how critical is product design when we're assessing a healthy recycling system? Asking how well you think US companies are prioritizing design for recycling at the moment. And then as someone active in the recycling space, we know we have a lot of folks here that recycling is their literal job. Are you ever confused if something is or is not recyclable? So we'll let this run for about another minute here, and then I'll launch the results.
Okay, sounds good. And as we're doing that, it looks like we might have Wes back, but now I just see an empty chair. So we're getting Wes back, which is good. Wes is also coming in hot from being overseas, so we appreciate his help today. Wes, there you are. Hello, Wes. Should we test your mic?
1 2 1 2.
Working good, Wes? President, I'm very glad to have you here, Wes. How are you doing today? All right, Lily, should we check out the poll?
All right, you should be able to see the results. So we're seeing that there's a lot of importance. Everyone seems to agree that design for recycling, product design is very important when looking at a recycling system. We're seeing a pretty mixed bag with the majority of folks weighing in around 3-4 when assessing the current grade for companies prioritizing design. And we see a few people who are never confused. I love that, and I want to be you. We see a lot of occasional confusion, and then some folks who are very confused out there. So it's a bit of a mix.
Well, good. All right. Well, then, if you are never confused, then we'll need your help in the chat, keeping us in line. So let's set the stage for today. If you've joined us in any of these past ones, I want to make sure we're all thinking about a whole system. It's really easy to just look for silver bullets of we could fix recycling if we just did one thing or another. But the Recycling Partnership for years has looked at the system as having 5 components: design, access, engagement, processing and sorting, and end markets. And throughout the last decade, decade plus, this is what we've spent our entire sphere working in, is to build a better system with each of those components. And we really believe that the recycling system needs all of us, from the NGO side to the business leaders, the community leaders, policymakers, and of course, every human in every home here in this country. The system needs all of us working together. And that's why these sort of conversations are good, because it's good to push and pull together and share different perspectives. So last time we spent time talking about a super murky part of the recycling system, and that was the end markets, the place where old stuff turns to new stuff. We're going to stay in murky world, but flip to the other side of how things are designed for the system. This part is also tricky to measure, and because it's constantly evolving, but it's also a lot of different companies that are pumping stuff out into the world, and there's not been one common system of evaluating if something is truly designed. And our speakers are gonna talk into that today. But if anyone has told you that this is an easy thing to do, they're joking. It is definitely not. And so as we start to think about recyclability and designing for recyclability, I think it's important to start with who gets to call the shots. Who defines what recyclability even means? We've certainly been working on it for 11 years. Paul's group works on it. APR design guides, plastics recyclers design guides, are 30 years old. REMA, EPA, there's a lot of activity in the space. But what is heartening, and I'd love to hear from our speakers today, is these pieces are starting to come together, and policy is a big driver of the coming together, but also the public is just calling for it. They're kind of saying enough is enough. And Aaron, maybe you'll lean into how the UN Global Plastics Treaty is helping to drive alignment. So when we think about recyclability, we think about several things that must be true for something to truly be recycled. It was designed, people could do it, it's captured in the MRF, the fate of the material, the package is really there, we're ensuring that the old stuff turns to new stuff, and that there's plenty of accessibility for that material in the marketplace. So we think whenever a company calls us and says, we want to make sure that the public recycles our package, or that this is recyclable, we really walk companies through all of these things, because designing for recycling is not simple. And in the absence of policy, it's been kind of a free-for-all. Frankly, and now with the presence of policy in EPR states, we're starting to see more of a consistent alignment. But recycling is just one part of the piece. And before, one more thing I think is important to raise is recyclability is important to us as recyclers, but we need to make sure that it fits into the bigger context. Before we decide we're going to just design for recyclability, we have to step back and say, what are we really designing for? Why do you come to work every day? I come to work every day because I care about toads and turtles. I started off as a wildlife biologist and a field biologist, and I'm really interested in protecting ecosystems and biodiversity. And I look at resource preservation as an important tool for that. So I bring that mindset in when I'm coming into design for recycling and talk about human health. I know that this group, everyone here wants to talk about microplastics, plastics pollution, the economic component. I'm interested in the socio impact of it. And I think that is truly the taller ladder we have to move up. And I want to give a shout out to some work that's happening with the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network on safety and sustainability as a criteria as part of the treaty, because we have to make sure that the chemistry that goes into building stuff is good to the start point, because it won't get better in the recycling process without that. So that's the crux of our conversation today. Paul's going to really give us some good information about people. Are they confused and why? We spend a lot of time studying the human side of this, and with the goal of getting simpler, making the system work better so it's easier. And I know that everyone on this webinar, y'all have been really interested in our slides. So one of the things that I think Lily and I thought that you all would be really interested is really getting meaty into the policy sphere of how is that changing it. When you are changing the landscape for this, when you get these slides, I'll give you a sneak peek. Look, there's this big appendix at the back with EPR definitions and what's different in each state. We're not digging into that today, but we thought you'd probably have questions about it and it cues us up for next week. So we went ahead and put it in there so you'd have it as a top. But speakers, we're going to want to hear you talk about policy and harmonized standards, transparent and labeling, and an eradication of greenwashing and system investment. So this is what we're hoping to dig into with our speakers today. And with that, I think enough of me and on to y'all. So I'm going to turn off the slides here so we can see your faces. All right, Aaron, Paul, and Wes, let's start to dig into this. Aaron, why don't you get us started, and we're going to have a good discussion about, but let's start of what's different today than it was a year, 10 years ago. Set the stage for us, Aaron.
I mean, I think you talked a lot about that with like how we've had like disaggregated design standards. We've had a proliferation of use of different materials and combined materials. And I would say arguably up until like maybe the last 5 years, we had a divestment in the US of actual infrastructure, right? So we definitely were working in the complete opposite direction than what was needed for a circular economy. And when we think about a circular economy, it's sort of linking all those pieces of the choices for reuse, how we design them for use, and how we design them for like cascading value, whether that's recycling or reuse or even something like compost, right? And then how do we put the infrastructure in place to do that? Well, and all of those things need to be utterly connected. And I think the beginning point, we see this a lot in the chat, is really around how do we make sure that that product is designed for that entire system, right? I think not just designed for use, but designed for that entire system. And I like to think about this as like if you're a supply chain manager, right? And you are creating procurement standards or design guidelines for your manufacturing line, you're not going to say to everybody, anything goes. Just send it to me. I'm going to make it into something valuable. It's going to be great. But that is literally our recycling infrastructure today. It's like, just send it to us. I mean, we give them broad guidelines with a glorious sticker on the top of our blue bin. And you have the people who sort of follow those. You have the people who wish cycle those and they throw everything. That's my mom. She's a classic wish cycler. She puts it in there. She hopes you can figure it out. And then, but none of that is actually equating to solid, like quality, consistent product, which means you're not actually funding a system that can then stay open for a long term, right? The same way if you did that in a manufacturing line, it wouldn't work. So what's changed is that we have taken, in the light of this being an environmental issue, right? And I want to highlight that that has even changed. That spurred a lot of action and questioning, like, why do we have this problem? And then we said, okay, we've got this problem because the system's not linked up. It's broken. Oh, is it a material problem or is it a system problem? And then we sort of said, hey, it's not just a material problem. It's not just about using less and making it recyclable. It's about assessing, do we choose to use the material? Do we make too much of it?
Shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Yeah. Then, okay, we're going to use it. How do we make it? And then how do we get it back again, right? And then they're saying, oh, well, we don't have enough infrastructure. Okay, well, how do you get infrastructure? And how do you make infrastructure work? What are the enabling? Where's the policies? And how do you get behavior change, right? So what's been great in the last like 5 to 7 years is you've seen that complete, like people have said, oh, there's more to this than the material. And that has escalated to this global scale where there is now a treaty being negotiated to create those same, like, okay, what are the right enabling conditions? What are the things that every country in the world needs to do to address global supply chains that don't adhere to country borders? And so that in the end, we can have these circular systems where not just the US can thrive, but countries that are low income countries who are going to invest in infrastructure and do not produce products can also receive products, manage them, and have an sustainable economic model for getting them back, right? So that's a lot that's changed. And that's why we're accelerating in the US right now with 7 EPR systems, right? Like, and companies are now saying, okay, we'll reduce. They're saying, give us design guidelines. Tell us what to do. We will change it, right? And then they will, and then now we're figuring out how to put that infrastructure and like turn that large ship on a dime is what we're trying to do. So I mean, I guess that would be where we are today.
Okay, materials and material choices, but should it even exist? Investment in infrastructure, sustainable or reduction and reuse, but really moving away, moving towards something more circular. Paul, I see you nodding. Is that aligned with you? What are you seeing?
I absolutely echo everything Aaron said. So the way I look at it is this. So first off, I'm old. So I've been in packaging for about 35 years. I can say that, you can't, but I'm allowed to say it. And the big shift that I've seen, and I would tell you I wasn't sure if I'd see this in my lifetime, just to be completely honest, is extended producer responsibility is now answering the question of what is the ROI for sustainability. I will tell you, I believe it was always there. So most of us on this call are probably true believers, and we know this. The majority of the space, and we'll talk about this with intention behavior later, they have many things that are pulling their attention, right? If they're not focused on this day to day. So when you would go in a meeting and talk about, here's sustainability choices for all the things Aaron just walked through, like all these constraints and how do you do theory of constraint change, the financial piece of it was always, well, how do we pay for this? And what's the cost of change? And what does that look like? There was some movement, right? We did see a lot of good behavior, but not at the scope and scale that was needed. And so as specifically in the US, but you've seen Canada, you've seen Europe participating in extended producer responsibility. Now you literally can look at a chart to say, here is your ROI. Here's the cost of change if you don't do this. And there's a new financial factor when you're in with your CFO or your finance team to say, okay, this is how we need to look at it. All of that we're talking about today is becoming more and more possible because of that. And I know there are people who have been what I would say anti-extended producer responsibility. My point to them is I've never seen the level of energy until it started to pass. So if we were going to do this before now, at least historically, the data would not match that was happening. So I'm excited that we're actually seeing projects that I would tell you I don't think would ever be greenlit. Aaron talked about reuse. So we're talking about recyclability and design for recyclability. What when you get to certain products that maybe recycling isn't the best option and it should be a reuse option or it should be a compostable option, or those projects had all been kind of put on hold. Some of it was pandemic related, I would tell you, but a lot of it came back to that ROI discussion of cost. That's the biggest shift I'm seeing. And I would say every year for the last 2 to 3 years, it's incremental. We're at a real inflection point that we're going to see change, I think, at a very rapid rate. The curve will not be a straight line. The curve will jump up as you see the costs starting to change for brands and for product producers. So it's a really exciting time, but I do get it's a very stressful time for a number of people.
Yeah, well, I think, Paul, the shift from voluntary to policy driven, we were started in a voluntary landscape. And I think the Recycling Partnership is actually a really good experiment of, is there a ceiling on how big you can get just through contributions and, willingness? And I think the answer is heck yes, there's a ceiling on that. And if we don't get to policy, I'm so proud of what the partnership's built in a decade, but without policy, it will take us 150 years to fix recycling in the United States. And that timeline does not work for me. So Wes, what are you seeing? What's different from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not even a close race. I mean, the biggest shift that we've seen, and it's monumental, is consumer demand. I mean, that's what the supply chain is responding to more than anything else. And I actually, the COVID era, as challenging as it was, created a level of packaging awareness and also chronic health issues. It put that in front of everybody and it put it in front of literally everybody. It wasn't just a small portion of the country or the world. For 2 years, everyone experienced a tremendous amount of packaging waste to their house. And we were also in the middle of a chronic health epidemic. So it really enlightened people to begin to ask the right questions. And what I see more than anything else is the retail brands and the consumer products companies are responding to that shift in demand. And when I'm sitting down with a lot of our customers, I mean, I quote it all the time, 18 to 34-year-olds have more buying power today than the baby boomers. And that demographic is demanding sustainable materials, more recyclable materials, healthier materials by like 85%. I mean, so if you're a retail brand, that's everybody,
Yeah.
And so nothing will shift the behavior of the supply chain and industry more than consumer demand. And I actually think that's a pretty deep place to consider because it really goes back to the power is in the hands of the people, and if we want to really see change, that's where it's going to come from. I do think, legislation and regulation is having an impact, but I do not think it's the biggest driver. What I see more and more is our customers are coming to us and they're saying, today, our packaging is a brand attribute. Our packaging is telling our customers who we are ethically, morally. And I also think because of that, I like to say it all the time, like the antidote for greenwashing is authenticity. If you want to be an authentic brand that is representing environmental ethics and strong morals, greenwashing doesn't work. It's a huge liability, actually. And so today, the customers that we're dealing with more and more are asking really good questions, and they want to be damn sure that when they're making these transitions, that they're making good ones. And that's why we've invested so much in not just saying, hey, we've got a group of products over here that are green packaging. You know, we're looking at everything from the feedstocks and how those feedstocks are manufactured, the process of manufacturing the products themselves, the end of life scenarios, the opportunity to even use branding on the packaging to really heighten the brand awareness. You know, back to the earlier question about designing for recycling, it's more than just designing for recycling. It's designing packaging to appeal to consumers who care about sustainability, health, planetary health. And I think that trajectory is permanent and will only grow. So I've got great optimism.
Good. Well, I think this is a good time. Lily has sent me there's a number of questions that are kind of about the chicken and egg of investment, like which is leading. So Wes, you talked about the driver being that the demand, the public wants it, the buying power of those 18 to 34-year-olds. But that's typically where we've run into the biggest challenge with recycling. Recycling to date is a reaction, right? When there's a big enough pile of like stuff that someone can figure out how to turn it into something new, then it happens. But this shift that Aaron was talking about to a circular economy, we've got a chicken and egg of which comes first, the innovation with the consumer, or the innovation with the company, or with the system driver. So Aaron, what are your thoughts on how like how do we get this started?
I mean, I think any circle is a chicken and egg, right? Any cycle is, right? I mean, it is, but I think where we have fallen short on actually closing the loop, not to like put a pun on that, is that we've never treated recycling as upstream. Like think about how hard we design and create efficiencies and cost savings for our raw material inputs. We do not make that same investment in the raw material input that is recycling, right? Like that's what's, I think this shift and acknowledgement is that like, now we're saying, okay, like we're good at that. Like, and when I say we're, I mean companies, right? Companies are saying we're good at this. We've done this. We've been doing this for years. Like we can design this system. And that's where this opportunity for public-private partnership is coming into play, right? Where the government, it's no longer, and why we're seeing more policy, because policy before was government saying to companies, do it this way. And American companies don't traditionally love, neither does the American government, to be clear, love to be told what to do, right? And so they're saying, hey, let's work together on this. Let's take responsibility for it. And in doing so, we'll do it in our best interest. And I, as a nonprofit and environmental NGO, I'm not saying that in like a bad way. I'm saying like, I would like them to make it efficient. I would like them to make it lower energy, lower water, like more transparent. All of those things we need to have all the environmental benefits come from them actually investing in the system that they will then design to use. And then they will pay to have that, like that, those are all the key enabling conditions. So I think that's how we sort of close the loop in the process of it. And one clarification, and hopefully I'm not assuming incorrectly on this, Wes, like Wes was talking about consumer demand. When you hear Wes talking about that, his consumers are big brands in many cases, right? Like not just purchasers, but big brands who have a ton of purchasing power too, and are saying upstream, because they're being held accountable for this now. They're saying, hey, every time my branded packaging ends up on a beach, I have somebody jumping off of my building calling me the largest polluter in the world. That's really, with social media today, that is very powerful. So I think the big brands are saying we have to change. And that also becomes very influential in the time of like advocating for the policies that were needed and to put the products out there. So it's not like but it comes back to that no chicken. I mean, the no silver bullet you started us out with, Keith. Like, it's like every time you answer a question, you're answering in like a large loop of pieces of the problem.
Yeah, Wes, it looks like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat. So I do think one big dynamic that has changed is you've got packaging companies like Atlantic Packaging and a lot of our brands that are out there publicly, like I'm sitting on this call as a good example, advocating for recycling reform. Like 5 years ago, you wouldn't have seen me advocate. I mean, like it wasn't really on my radar exactly. But today, the companies like Atlantic and the brands that we support are recognizing that we cannot accomplish our goals without sophisticated recycling. It's critical. And so it's why me personally, like I'm involved with a lot of advocacy work and talking to politicians and saying fixing recycling and composting infrastructure in America is the biggest no-brainer in the history of the world. I mean, like we've got all of this material. There is huge demand for it. Every company I deal with is desperate for recycled material. And we have this broken infrastructure that doesn't allow us to produce these products and these materials that there's radical demand for. You know, it's just Econ 101. And so to me, it's really more about building broad coalitions like the Recycling Partnership with a broad group of stakeholders. This is not, it shouldn't be very partisan, you know, and hey, it's not all that expensive either in the grand scheme of the federal government, you know, which we'll need some support from, and state governments. I think in, you know, 6 or 8 or 10 years with the right legislation and the right infrastructure investment, we could have dramatic impacts on circularity in America. But the big difference is you've got big companies, packaging companies, retail brands, consumer products companies that are beginning to, and I think will continue to really push politicians for recycling reform.
Paul, I'm going to want to get your take on this because there's a number of questions of like, if these design guides have been around for a long time and SBC has been working on it, we've been working on it, why isn't it all done yet? Is policy, like, why not, Paul?
Well, it's a great question. So I would say I tend to look at it instead of chicken or the egg as theory of constraint. And so literally we do have to work on all these things, but that can become very overwhelming, right? So we're talking about design, we're talking about recycling infrastructure, consumer engagement, chemicals of concern, microplastics. We do have to do all that work. So what I start to think about is where are the constraints? Where are they shifting? And then how do we accelerate by looking at each constraint that has an adjacency? So similar to what Wes was talking about with the consumer. So you've had a shift in consumers, and similar to what Aaron was talking about with policy, you've had a shift in policy. So that shifted your whole theory of constraint map, right? Of what you can do and what's possible. Where you had some constraints before, you're seeing them loosen. So for instance, to answer the question about if we've had design guides for this long, why haven't we used them? I will go back to ROI. So cost of change for companies when they do this, if you didn't have the policy and you didn't have the consumer behavior that Wes is speaking of to take in front of your team to say, here's why we should do this, it was a much more difficult conversation to get change, even with all the technical guidelines for recycling. Now, design for recycling also can be just technical design for recycling. It doesn't mean that the infrastructure Wes just spoke about exists nationally. So again, you'll have to do that constraint. That doesn't mean it's not important. You do have to design for it, but then we do need then TRP doing the work that they're doing with grants and bringing that system up to bear. So when those are designed, they can be recycled. We need what Aaron's doing with looking at treaties and pulling plastic through, what Wes is doing with his advocacy work. You don't get to just pick like, we're only going to do this one. The cool good news is just even on this call, we have a bunch of really smart people in different areas who are doing the work. So you don't take your foot off the gas because you didn't see a design used. You start to realize there was a return on investment discussion happening. That discussion is changing very drastically based on consumers and based on policy. So you have new levers you never had before. So if you did go forward with a design and didn't get the change in your organization or in your municipality, this is the perfect time to revisit that.
I love that. Paul, I'm going to come to you in just a second because I think we need to start drilling down into what the public thinks and public confusion. You mentioned that. I see some conversation in the chat about the role of product designers and industrial designers. I'm married to an industrial designer. He's a designer for GoPro right now, and it makes for fun dinner conversations where I'm trying to make less stuff and he's making the stuff, and you know, that's what marriage is all about, right? Paul, why don't you take us a click deeper? public confusion is rampant because it is confusing. It's changing so fast. So how should this audience, how should this group think about the public?
I think, so first off, we need to think about the public as a group that really wants to do good things and do the right thing. Overall, the public, there's so many studies. Please don't do another study about this anyone either. Like, I love consultants, but you don't need to hire another consultant to ask, do people care about the world? Do people care about the ocean? Like, you're going to get those same positive answers. So what really becomes the discussion is, well, if that is true, which we know it is, why don't we see a higher recovery rate? What is the behavioral change? What we are saying at SPC and How to Recycle is this. We really have not met consumers where they live with this topic. So what do I mean by that? All of us could go on probably ad nauseum about recycling in this discussion. The average consumer has tons of friction in their life, right? They're trying to pay their mortgage, they're getting the kids to soccer, they're making lunch. We all have that, but they don't live in our world. So think about this for a second. In the US, we have never had a national, not regional, national campaign at the level of like a give a hoot, don't pollute, only you can stop forest fires on this topic. But yet, we're surprised that consumers somehow want to do something but don't understand fully how to do it in a broken system to a certain extent. That shouldn't be shocking to anyone. So that sounds negative. What's the positive? From a standpoint of labeling, and of course, How to Recycle is under green, blue, so I will talk about that, but it could be other labels. 8 out of 10 consumers today understand the How to Recycle label. They see it, they don't necessarily know what to do with it, and 800 brands are using it. What we're looking at is a national multi-year campaign to do exactly what I said, to educate the consumer, but not from a sustainability standpoint. So we're looking at, we have hired an agency, I can't say who yet, working with world-class agencies to say, you understand behavior, you understand consumers. They do love sustainability, but that frankly wasn't the first thing we looked for. We wanted real specialists in this field to say, how do you run an impactful campaign that changes behavior? So that's the piece. People want to do this. We really haven't educated at the level we should, personally, nationally, to tell them how to do it, what to do it. Once we do that and track it, I think you will continue to see that change. Plus what Wes spoke about earlier, you're also seeing a consumer change. So those two things together are very hopeful.
So I think the flag there is it's not about awareness, it's about the behavior, and you can't measure recycling awareness. You have to measure what's coming in the MRF, how clean it is. I saw our team popped in the behavior change research that we've done because we want everyone to have access to it, and Paul's building off of it, and everyone can all build from what we've known. I agree, no more repeats. I think that, there's a bunch of questions that are coming in around, pulling us back to how do we drive towards circularity? And Wes, I know you sit on the California EPR board, right, Wes?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe let's take it, if we've gone from the consumer, let's go to the brand and use your perspective there on the California board. But should brands be required to dedicate a portion of their contributions to teaching customers how to responsibly dispose or reuse or recycle or compost? Like, what's the role? What's the onus on the brands? And give us your perspective, and then maybe, as you sit on that board, what's different in California?
Well, I mean, my perspective is that the packaging supply chain in coordination with the brands have all the responsibility. We're the ones that are making these products, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they are healthy, that they are non-toxic, and that they are as circular as they can possibly be. And I do believe that shift is occurring within the supply chain. I really do. I think most, the brands are made up of, good people for the most part. And the packaging companies like our companies, it's just a new world. It's just not something that we considered even 10 years ago. So there's this sort of awakening process that we're all going through. And I think as we start to have more and more success, it will become something that's really exciting, to be, we all as organizations want to innovate. I mean, innovation is what drives profit, and this revolution around sustainability and designing for recycling and composting, it is driving innovation in our industry like I've never seen before. And so that innovation has to be coupled with education. I figured that out really early in my career because some of our value propositions got so sophisticated that without the education piece, our customers didn't understand it. So anytime today that we innovate, education is a big piece of it. And I think the brands will want to educate consumers, because it heightens the image of the brand. If you're bringing an innovative product to market that's more circular, you're going to want to be really sure that the customers you're selling it to understand, hey, this is why we made these decisions. This is why we're using this material. This is how you should recycle it or how you should compost it responsibly. Because when it's done well, the brands feel great, the consumers feel great, the planet feels great. I mean, there's a win-win-win scenario. So my hope is by utilizing marketing, and social media is a huge piece of it, that all of these transitions cannot be seen as something that we have to do, but something that we want to do because it's just good for everybody. And it also, for the brands that do it really well, they'll be the leaders. The brands that do this really well will be the ones that will be the most profitable, the most innovative, that will be out in front. And that's, a lot of the work that we're doing at Atlantic, it certainly comes from an idealistic place. There's no doubt that I'm passionate about this, but it's also a business calculation. This is the way the world is going. Get on board. And yes, you have to invest in the education piece because a lot of these materials and a lot of this is new to people. And I think, part of that education is simplifying things. It's way too complicated right now. There's way too many materials. We need to harmonize. We need to make it simple. We need to streamline it. And we need collaboration across the supply chain, and that absolutely includes governments.
So policy is a jetpack that gets this going. It starts to harness the citizen or human interest that Paul flagged, and then Wes, talking about how you can build on it from a business interest and connect them through marketing. It sounds like we're starting to talk not just about what's broken, but what's working. So Aaron, I'd love to know your perspective of what else is working in your mind. Oh, you're still on mute though, but it's very clever what you're saying. I loved it.
I'll just sit back and just look at you like I know what I'm talking about. I think, there's been a lot of things that I've been really impressed by that have been working well. One, I think that while imperfect, the global negotiations, and arguably imperfect and at times very frustrating, are actually pushing the system, right? They're creating a standard, whether fully agreed to in an ultimate, like legally binding agreement or not, that is already driving change within the system, right? It's already forcing alignment around, all right, what are those things that we just don't need to make anymore because they are high risk to people or high risk to the environment and are definitely problematic to a longer term sustainable business model for circular economy. For everything else, how do we design it together? How do we fund the shift? How do we put the right policies in place, right? It's asking those questions already. And so that is starting to trigger really positive actions in the private sector, right? You see Colgate moving to fully homogeneous plastic for toothpaste tubes and how that is shifting toothpaste tube recycling. You're seeing Coke make changes to the iconic green Sprite bottle because the green PET degraded the quality of the PET stream and moving it to clear. You see policymakers starting to think about EPR in a country like the US, where it had been sort of a bad word for a while there. And then you see investors really saying, okay, how do we collectively mobilize to invest in this systemic change and not just putting dollars where dollars are needed, but connecting dollars to the right products the right policies and the right behavior change. That is what I see that is working, right? And so even in a world that continues to get more and more divisive, there is like so much about the problem solving for this and the need for that collective action by everybody has been mobilized, and we're not detracting from it because it actually, as both Wes and Paul have made sense, like, I mean, have stated, it makes just a ton of sense. It's not like, it's not really, once you get into it, it's actually not, it's not that conflicting. So I know there's some things that will go away because of it, and that can be pretty problematic for folks. But
Right, if they've gotten used to something being convenient and then it's
Yeah.
not there, but
Yeah.
it was convenient, but maybe it wasn't healthy or it didn't have an outcome. And like this
Yeah.
is tricky stuff, right?
Humanity is super like innovative, right? Like that's the way we problem solve. That's how we get, like that's how we get through major crises. And like the opportunity not just to fix a broken system like recycling that we're doing, but also explore new ones like reuse. And which arguably I would say is actually not new. It's like old but new again. But like at a scale that we've never done in the world before, right? Like what does reuse look like in this world like of fast-paced, fast consumption, right? And really just rethinking like ownership and the shared community altogether, right? When you get like broader than like single-use plastic. So I think, there's a lot that there's so much potential there that continues to make me feel excited and hopeful about this issue.
Good. Other speakers have comments that connect to the Global Plastic Treaty? Specifically, Paul? Yeah.
I think it's not so much about the treaty for me, but to riff off of like convenience change and the difficulty of change. And we were talking about the pandemic earlier and what all occurred there. So we're on a call today on video, and we're all doing video calls. And I would tell you before that, how many of you just called people on the phone for work and weren't on video calls constantly every day? You can say you hate that. I get it if that's something, but we're all doing it. And so we moved very rapidly and changed very rapidly when there was a really scary reason to do it. I would say there is a really scary reason to do this change. So as we go forward, so that makes me hopeful actually, because I see that people can change very quickly when there's an incentive, right? When they're incented in a certain way. And so from the brand side, we are seeing those incentives to change, right? We're seeing consumers wanting it. We're seeing policy paying for it. So I'm pretty hopeful that people will like take on reuse when you see the incentive there for it. And I'm not just hopeful, we've just seen an example of it in our lifetime.
Yeah, well, we're tossing around a lot of terms today: circular economy, recycling, reuse, and I think it's really important to highlight that circular economy and recycling are not synonyms, right? A circular economy is moving away from you can make whatever you want and throw it away at the end to something that's more nutritive, like a tree. A tree's leaves become nutritive for the future, and I get excited about talking about a circular economy because it makes me think that from the very concept of my husband, the product designer, thinking of something new, he'll know that it either is or isn't reusable, is or isn't fixable, is or isn't recyclable. And there's no ambiguity that gets to this consumer mistrust piece. And that's truly what a circular economy is about. And recycling plays a portion in it, but it's not the leading portion, and it's not the only portion in that piece. I'd love to go, I'd love to spend some time on a call to action. So all of you are experts in your field. Wes, from a business perspective, Paul, you work with lots of businesses and trying to make momentum. Aaron, of course, you work with all the pandas and on a global sphere. So I'd love to know, what's your call to action? Like, Wes, let's start with you. What people are here because they're interested in this. So what can they do? If you're speaking to a company, what's your one thing, or a policymaker? Like, what's your call to action, Wes?
Well, it's sort of what I was referencing earlier. I mean, to me, the recycling infrastructure is the biggest low-hanging fruit that we've got. And I've met with so many policymakers who are just clueless. I mean, they really, it's just something that's not on their radar. They don't think of it, you know, they kind of throw it into the trash pickup category. It's just not an issue that gets them moving, but it should be. And so what I've tried to articulate is this is a business imperative. If you are pro industry, pro economy, the new economy will be a circular economy. The new economy is about sustainable materials. And we have to have policymakers that are standing up and advocating for recycling reform. I also think it's an incredible opportunity for bipartisanship, because there really is not a pro-pollution constituency. I mean, I haven't found that constituency that wants more plastic in the oceans, you know, and you also got this economic imperative, like I mentioned before, where you've got tremendous demand for recycled material and not enough supply. And it's because of the contamination in the broken recycling infrastructure. So the one thing I would do for all the brands on here is really to work with the Recycling Partnership and other organizations to advocate for recycling reform. Call your senators, call your Congress people. I promise you they are not educated on this. And we need to really begin to reframe this conversation. And it doesn't necessarily have to even be, if you're talking to a Republican where an environmental conversation may not work, you know, talk about the business imperative, you know, because I think you can see it through a lot of different lenses. So that's one of them. And then the other one is, you know, as brands and packaging companies, just really waking up to the fact that this is the way the world is going. And if you want to be successful, you know, tie sustainability and circularity to your brand and make the investments to make these shifts to more sustainable, more circular packaging, and tell stories. Every single time you make one of these transitions, tell a story about it. Telling stories is the way that humans have communicated for eons. It's what makes humans human. And this is a great story. The story of human beings waking up to the impact that we've had on the world and changing to more healthy, sustainable products. The transition will be really visible to the world. It will be it'll be a beautiful transition, and we can all be a part of it. And so I really ask people to look at it from a spiritual perspective. This can be a moment that we will look back on, and other generations after us will celebrate this if we do it well.
Yeah, well, and you know, Wes, I see a lot of questions about our brands taking back the stuff they make, and that was the whole that was the session we had last week about end markets. And you know, the big call to action is we need brands using more recycled content and making the demand. And I think that's a good story to tell too, Wes.
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
we don't have a single customer that's not begging for clean, high quality recycled material. The demand's astronomical, but we can't supply it because we don't have the infrastructure to supply it at scale. And that's something we can fix.
Wes, you've been called to be the inspirational speaker for recycling nerds in need of a little boost of eco mojo. So I think you're on it, Wes. Paul, what's your call to action?
Yeah, mine is similar. I would say we talk a lot about choosing courage over fear. Like everything that we've said, people at their core, I believe, are good people and want to do all these things. And actually, we know a lot of the solutions. These aren't mysterious solutions anymore that we're talking about. So we tend to think about like, well, why isn't it happening? And we have three categories. One is just the fear of it, fear of change, like we've talked about. The second is ego. You know, like I've always done this. We know how to do this. Why do I have? No one's going to tell me. Our government's not going to tell me. Like the ego piece, and then the third really becomes paralyzation, like where you there's so many choices, chicken or the egg. So the question I would say to everyone is, if you look at some of the issues in your area that this touches, whether it be recycling, creating new products, design, and you are not working with your competitors and or other groups, go do that. Push through those three things. And today, make an active commitment. So working with, just to be clear, doesn't mean just sending a check, doesn't mean just showing up to a webinar. It means rolling your sleeves up and doing the work. I find that when you work with others on this topic, you know, Wes was just very inspirational about it. Who wouldn't want to be in a partnership to have that discussion? It pushes away the fear. It can generally push away the ego. It can move you into action. So please actively look for others to work on to accelerate this work.
Yep. A good call to action. And Erin, what's yours? What's your call to action?
I think I like all of these calls to action. I think they're really important. I think in this day and age, I think being a bridge builder and not a bridge burner is the key, right? Like we are, that comes with educating. That comes with not using jargon and assuming that everyone understands what you're saying, right? And that in that you can really you can understand where the opposite party is coming from and what their real needs and objectives are. And what I have found in all of these conversations that we've been having with government, with at the global scale, at the national state scale, with businesses and even individuals, is that we are actually more aligned than we are not. And so there's a huge opportunity to like find out where there is misalignment and and find a path forward. Because if not, what we don't want to do is allow for the lack of progress to happen because we can't get to perfect right away.
I agree.
And I think with that comes celebrating the right step versus trying to knock it down. In the discussion that we're having, which primarily focuses on recycling, which is not the only solution, but one of them,
Right.
just because we're talking about it doesn't mean we don't want the other things or need the other things. We just know that this is one of the essentials, right? And so I think all of those are really key elements of it. So yeah, all good, though, calls to action for the three folks here.
I like the idea of telling stories and not letting ego and the status quo get in our way and pushing towards progress. I couldn't agree with you more, Erin, that perfect is the enemy of the good very often, and that's opposite of the way the partnerships worked since day one. So snap in for that. We have some call to actions too. We host these series because we want everyone to come together towards meaningful action. Companies, we need you to advocate for smart policy, follow design guides, buy the stuff back, use recycled content, invest in recycling labels like Recycle Check Plus and How to Recycle Plus and Recycle Check. If you have your phone out, go ahead and scan this QR code because it will take you to each of the resources that we have outlined today. So communities, we need your help in making sure you have an accurate yes list of what can be recycled in your town because it's changing and your public looks to you for that information. And policymakers, we have toolkits on how to help pass good EPR, but to also work on things like incorporating recycling into the federal tax code. So we are very interested in everyone being part of the solution because it will serve us all. And that's why we're going to continue this webinar series with one more. Next Thursday is our part 5, policy should be spicy. And we'll dig into what this really looks like in the US landscape. So we hope you'll join us for the 5th and final part of this series. As a reminder, you'll in a day or two, you'll get this deck. And with it has this appendix of extra information all about what's happening specific to state EPR states, policy-driven states. And the more feedback we have from you, audience, on what to drill into, the better. So I want to close by saying a huge thank you to Erin, to Paul, and to Wes for joining us and for working every day to help drive this issue forward. So with that, thank you, and I hope everyone has a terrific day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.